How's it going today, guys? We're still on week 1 of SeptemPeaks. This will be our second video. This is going to cover episode 2 and 3 of season 1. Tommy can't be here today because he is working. He has been taking on a lot more work recently, so he did watch episode 2 and 3 with me. He will be back later for SeptemPeaks. I don't know when, but... And one of the first notes I actually have here is watching episode 2 the other day with Tommy. I hate having to fast forward the credits because we were doing that to save time, but it's just always a shame because the credits they feel like the proper portal into Twin Peaks, so it always just sucks like not being able to like experience that right before you watch it. Like, I don't know, there's just something about it. In this episode, we're introduced to Jerry Horn, who is eccentric and a wacky entrepreneur obsessed with indulgence. So Jerry, throughout the series, typically has something to eat or drink, showing that he appreciates the value of, like, indulgence, the value of indulging in food, indulging in just things you enjoy, you know, music, stuff like that. And yeah, Tommy J, he hated whenever Ben Horn bit into his sandwich. He was just like, I hate when people bite sandwiches weird. And Ben Horn had like it wasn't a sub, I think they called it a baguette, but I don't even think it was really a baguette. He's holding it like long style, he bites it like in the middle. So Tommy was like, why the hell do people bite? Stuff like that. So that was pretty funny. And yeah, Tommy brought up a good point, and we kind of like built this theory as we were talking about it. Could the fact that the Great Northern is made completely of wood, like, and timber and stuff like that, could that be the reason why it's almost like a safe haven of Twin Peaks? Like, it's like I don't know, it's almost the church of Twin Peaks, you know? It's just interesting to me that could that be why, because these spirits do travel through electricity, they travel through different kinds of frequencies. So the fact that they are in this giant wood building, I think could be, you know, tied to they're insulated from the electricity, from the demons, from the other spirits. And then yeah, there's a scene where Leo meets Mike and Bobby pretty much in like the pitch black dark, and they're walking around in the woods. They're like, oh, we're supposed to meet him here, and then Leo is standing right behind a tree, and he's like, you know, I don't remember if he yells at him but yeah, he just he's creepy. I mean, they've already set up that Leo's a little weird. This scene you really get to see it, and Mike and Bobby do too. So and yeah, it's really interesting here, the dialogue between Bobby and Leo. Leo says Laura was a wild girl, and Bobby's like, tell me about it. And Leo's like, maybe someday. And then Leo tells Bobby about, I got a real problem, you know, my problem is my woman's been stepping out on me while I'm, you know. Bobby does a terrible job of hiding that he is sleeping with Shelly. So like, Bobby completely is like, do you know who it is, man? Like, oh. And it makes sense because he's a high school kid, you know, so he wouldn't be as smooth as a grown man would be about anything. It's interesting, Nadine's arms bend back whenever she's working out with her little rowing machine, right after she says Ed makes her sick. Now, I don't know if both those things tie to, I don't remember if it is episode 8 of The Return, but where they show the lady who's floating and her arms are backwards and she's like vomiting up the Garmin Boja. I don't know if that's tied to that, but I just thought that was an interesting little point. One of my favorite character moments in all of Twin Peaks, it's so simple. Ed walks into the Double R Diner and, you know, he steps through the front door and he does this little wave, like, and he like sticks his arm out like that, like it's just really sweet and innocent, and he's this big tall guy that, like, you don't have to wave like that, but he does anyway. You know? It's cute because he's waving for Norma, you know, and you can tell that they have a relationship, you know, of some kind. It's really sweet. This scene then, like, it establishes a little bit more of how they feel about each other, where they're at, and that kind of thing. Oh yeah, Cooper's stone throw Tibetan instinctual ritual thing they do. it's really funny because Hawk wears mittens. I believe it's, again, like I was talking about the Great Northern, I think it's to insulate from the spirits that can interfere with the intuition and the intention of what's happening with the thing Cooper's doing. So it's really, really interesting to me to try to figure out, like, is that what it means, or is it insulating from something? Is it insulating the spirits being able to get into Hawk? Like, why is he wearing oven mittens, you know? Truman asks Coop how he got the idea, and then he's like, you really got this from a dream? And Cooper's like, yes. And then he just kind of like shakes his shoulder like, all right, buddy, we'll let you do your thing. But you can tell no one really, everyone is curious and they're trying to be open-minded, but no one fully believes Cooper. They're kind of like, this is weird. And Cooper's so kind and patient with Lucy, which, you know, shows his true heart, shows who he really is. Audrey says, whenever she and Donna meet in the diner right before Audrey has her dance, she says Agent Cooper loves coffee. So you can tell that she's really into Cooper and she really likes him. You knew that before, but it's just establishing that. I didn't even remember, but Audrey Horne actually knew about Laura Palmer and Ben Horne, like, way earlier than you actually find out they had a relationship. Yeah, I thought it was really funny, the moment where Cooper and Truman are sitting talking, and then Cooper just like grabs Truman's nose for a second. He's like, yep. And you're just like, what? Like, I don't know. It makes him so like weird but funny and like lighthearted. Yeah, this episode we're actually introduced to two of Tommy's favorites, Albert and Jerry. And Tommy loves Albert. I don't like Albert as much because he never really changes. Like, they set it up for him to change and be like a nicer person or whatever, but he, throughout the season, like throughout the seasons, even into the return, he never really changes that much. So I don't like him that much, but Tommy loves him. Tommy thinks he's like the coolest character on the show. So Leland gives some stuff up in this next scene with him in the living room of the Palmer residence. He was snapping before cutting the silence more with the record player. So like, something about stillness and silence messes with the demons when they're possessed in physical bodies, so they have to always have like sound or something going on. So he was snapping while the record player was playing. So pay attention to the pattern on Leland Palmer's jacket, because it is reminiscent of something. You'll see. Once you see it, like, I don't even need to tell you. I just want you to see it. Something interesting too. So in the return, the man from another place who's the little person in the red room, he basically calls himself the Arm in the return. But in season 1, it's revealed that Mike cut his arm off intentionally, partially because it had like the mom tattoo on it. So I think Mike and Bob are both descendants of this like mother demon thing, whatever. The thing that pukes up the Garmin Boja. That ties to why Bob and Mike want to be in Laura Palmer. Or why Bob wants to be in Laura Palmer, because Laura Palmer represents the opposite of the mother. So maybe Bob is thinking that he can overthrow the mother and become more powerful than her, and then he'll be the true, essence of darkness or whatever. My question was, is the man from another place all the evil that Mike cut off when he severed his arm? Is the, who becomes the arm, the weird fleshy tree thing in the return, is that character all the evil that was, taken from Mike once he cut his arm off? I don't know. One of the best, quotes that's just, weird but creepy at the same time, it's so Twin Peaks, is, "Catch you with my death bag." And Killer Bob says this, and it's a really creepy but interesting line, because it's got this ring to it. It's like, ugh, it makes your spine tingle a little bit. And then there's a part where when Coop has his dream and he's in the red room, his tie is very reminiscent of a scene in The Return where Actually, even at the end of season 2, when Coop is in the, I'm assuming the Black Lodge, and he's navigating through the Red Room, and he has those hallways that have the two sides of red curtains on them. His tie looks exactly like that, just the shots that we get, you know, from like back. So I'm wondering if Lynch like put that tie in there to give us a setup for visual, which is weird because like why would you do that on a tie? But it's Lynch. In the dream, Cooper hears the famous "That gum you like is going to come back in style," which was famously how Lynch and Frost announced that the return was going to be coming out. So that's a pretty big deal. I love whenever Laura is she's really leaning away from Cooper because they shot it backwards, but she's leaning toward him, and her bangs, I think, kind of like gravitate onto Coop's head because they shot it backwards. I just always remember that specific moment. I don't know why. Just the aesthetic of the Red Room and how that's all set up, and just the way that all looks. Like it's brilliant. Like it's surrealist. It is iconic. You know what I mean? You immediately think of Twin Peaks, and when you hear Twin Peaks, you immediately think of the Red Room. You immediately think of the red and the black and white chevron. You know, so some really important images and phrases introduced in this episode. So yeah, don't miss episode 2 of season 1. It's pretty great. Hey, what's up guys? It's Kirk from LaneFlix Media. We're just continuing with part 2 of SeptemPeaks 2021. This is episode 3 of season 1, Rest in Pain. So there's some clues revealed in this episode. Cooper tries to interpret his dream with Truman and Andy, I believe. And then Norma finds out that Hank is up for parole, so he will be coming back soon, supposedly. Truman explains that the Bookhouse Boys have a struggle with evil in the woods of Twin Peaks, and Maddie, Laura's lookalike and cousin, arrives in town. So that's like the breakdown, like just the big event, the big chunks of this episode. In the very beginning, Audrey lets Cooper know that she is consciously trying to help him solve Laura's murder. And then Coop asks her to sign her name, and he analyzes her handwriting with the note that was slipped under his door that said Jack with one eye, and he asks her about it. And then Albert is being belligerent with the folks of Twin Peaks about the autopsy of Laura's body, which is kind of weird because they don't really spell out when it was supposed to be, when Albert was supposed to be there. They act like they're supposed to be having the funeral like as he's doing the autopsy, so it's weird. It makes sense that they would have an FBI coroner come in, but it doesn't make sense that they would have the schedule so tight. It just doesn't add up logistically. For the show, I guess it makes sense. This is the part where Albert continues to be rude and kind of nasty toward Truman and the people of Twin Peaks. Truman has enough and socks Albert right in the face. And then Cooper says that he's sure that Truman meant to do that. Kind of a setup of the animosity between Truman and Albert, so it's interesting. And there's a proper setup of the cheesy, terrible soap opera Invitation to Love. And it's basically just telling the audience, like, hey, Twin Peaks is a parody of a soap opera. So, like, yeah, we're cheesy, but we got cool stuff coming too. So, Maddie, Laura's lookalike, shows up, and she literally looks exactly like Laura because it's played by the same actress, Cheryl Lee. Norma and Hank's situation is kind of spelled out again, so we kind of get an update. And Peggy Lipton is really fantastic as Norma Jennings in Twin Peaks, in all of it. I mean, even the return, she's really great, and she always has a very human empathy to her, and the way she plays the characters, so I really appreciate that. Sheriff Truman introduces Cooper to Leo Johnson, and then Coop asks Leo a few questions, and by this point he had memorized Leo's criminal record. So he asked him about it, and Leo's like, "Look it up. I'm never doing anything." And it's just to show how thorough Cooper is, and to kind of add to the whole detail-oriented character thing. But Leo, in this whole interaction, is showing really suspicious behavior. So, just for the audience, you're kind of like, "What?" Major Briggs and Bobby talk, and this talk is actually, like, I believe, way more important than it comes off as. Obviously it's important on a character level because it's a father-son moment, but to the logic and the mystery of the show, I think what Major Briggs tells Bobby is, like, super important. He says he compares Laura's death to that of a soldier, and then he mentions the greater good, which kind of ties into the whole thing from The Return, where Laura comes from Senorita Dio, and is basically like the essence of good is supposed to be what Laura is. It's very Christ-like, because then Laura is exposed to the horrors of mankind and humanity and the world, and she suffers for the sake of the whole town. So it is very messianic, or whatever you want to call it. And then Major Briggs mentions closure to Bobby, and he says that he can and he must and will learn to live without Laura Palmer and others that he's had to leave behind. Which also ties in, like, it ties into the greater plot of Twin Peaks, but him saying that to Bobby specifically also ties to when Bobby in Fire Walk With Me kills a guy, because Bobby literally murdered a guy like a few days before he's having this conversation with his father. So then Albert presents evidence as to Major Briggs then tells Bobby, "Don't be afraid, we'll all be there together." Major Briggs is in that moment talking about the funeral, but saying we'll all be together and to not be afraid, I think he's really telling Bobby about the future and about what will happen in Twin Peaks and what happens in The Return, like 25 years after the fact. So now, Albert comes back with evidence from the autopsy, and Coop remembers that Laura, in her dream said, or in Cooper's dream said, that sometimes her arms bend back, because Albert displays how her arms were tied behind her as she was killed. So it's just kind of interesting how it's all coming together. It's all kind of like puzzle piece fitting together type stuff. So then Albert further belittles Truman, and he tries to get Cooper's signature for report of Truman's assault. And then Coop sets him straight, and it's like, "You're lucky he didn't hit you sooner," like, "I'm surprised he didn't hit you sooner," and blah blah blah, like, pretty much you were being a jerk, like, you kind of deserved it. So then we get more of Ed and Nadine, and James shows up to Ed's house and tells him he can't go to the funeral, he just can't. So then we get Dr. Jacoby is seen by Audrey through a little, like, hidey hole, that he's helping Johnny cope with what's going on because Laura isn't there. And I found it really interesting because Jacoby, I think, is finding an empathetic energy in Johnny, because the two of them loved Laura two different ways, but they both loved her. And I think it's really sweet, and it shows that the two of them have a common emotion they're feeling. It's just really cool to see in characters. Oh yeah, so at Laura's funeral, it's interesting, during the prayer, Cooper is kind of scanning everyone's faces and just looking around to see who's doing what, and Bobby, by the end of the funeral, calls out the people of Twin Peaks, saying that they killed Laura, and Ben says we all did. And I actually wrote down the quote here. He says, "Pretty words aren't going to save her anyway, man, so save your prayers." And then that's when James loses it, and James kind of comes at Bobby, and they start fighting, and there's this really interesting, surreal, slow motion anger sequence that I thought was really nice. And then Leland Laura's father, jumps on the casket, and that causes the casket lift to malfunction. Or Tommy J and I have a theory that it's actually because Bob is in Leland at the time. So because Bob is in Leland, it's making the fact that there's a spirit there, other than just the normal human soul, is causing the electricity to malfunction in the machine. So that's why it's really malfunctioning, but you never really know. So then, yeah, we're introduced to the whole idea of the Bookhouse Boys, the secret society, as Cooper says, that watches out for the spirituality and the well-being of Twin Peaks. Sheriff Truman talks a little bit more about the darkness, and then Cooper says, as he's first tasting cherry pie in Twin Peaks, this must be where pies go when they die. And I just love that. And that's on like t-shirts and coffee mugs and stuff like that. So it's a common phrase of the show. And then, yeah, there's a scene here where they show Leo Johnson. His sweater has the chevron of the Red Room, of the floor in the Red Room. And then we see Shelley has a pistol that she puts away under a cupboard. Sheriff Truman meets with Josie. Catherine hears Josie, and then Josie opens the safe to show Truman the 2 ledgers to find 1 ledger. And Catherine calls Pete out and says, oh, you ought to be more of a man next time, blah, blah, blah. And Pete just kind of shrugs it off. Then Cooper kind of has an encounter with Jacoby at Laura's grave, like late at night. And then Dr. Jacoby declares himself a pretty terrible person, and he says he really doesn't care about people's feelings and the way they think and all that. And that he hopes Laura forgives him for not attending the funeral. So then after this, Josie tells Truman about the plot to kill her and take the mill. She thinks Catherine and Ben are out to get her, which they are. Yeah, it's really cool here. We get the Great Northern. There's a bunch of folks dancing. And Coop and Hawk are enjoying the open fire, the limber. They're just having a good time. And they're talking about several souls and dream souls, and how the dream soul is a Blackfoot legend, Blackfoot Native American legend. It's super interesting because as they're talking about it, they show a shot of Leland on the dance floor, kind of in the middle of all these people. And to me, it's foreshadowing, telling us that, like, hey, there's dream souls right here in this guy. Like, there's some more going on than what we think right now. Now, knowing what we know about Twin Peaks and Fire Walk With Me and The Return, I think it speaks like volumes as to what that really means. And I never really looked at it like this, but Leland has a freak out. He kind of like starts like, oh, will you dance with me? Will you dance with me? And he starts asking everybody. And Hawk and Cooper get up to take him home, but it's right after they have the conversation about dream souls. So I'm wondering if it's actually Bob that's in Leland that wanted to interrupt their conversation and didn't want Hawk to tell Cooper about dream souls and reveal more of the mystery to him, because he didn't want more people to figure it out. Like, he knew Native Americans had it figured out, but he doesn't want this society to figure it out. So definitely a solid episode. It's more dramatic than it is Twin Peaksy, but that is kind of like the foundation on which the surrealism and the crazy stuff in the show is built. You gotta have the setup episodes, you gotta have episodes that take care of the characters and make sure that everyone's believable. And yeah, so we're on to episodes 6 and 7, and then next week we're on to season 2. Thanks so much for watching. See you soon.